You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
Ahaz effectively ended Yahweh worship in the temple and replaced Yahweh with his own God, and all the priests were okay with that. None of them stopped him. So at the age of 36, 37, so right in there, he dies. And his son, who's barely 25, takes over. Now, he had been with his dad since his dad was king, of course, even before then. But his dad became king when he was 8.
Ahaz was an evil king of Judah who had destructive practices, such as idol worship and sacrilege against the temple of the Lord. The actions of Ahaz contributed to the downfall of the kingdom of Judah, which the Lord brought about in 586 BC. Today, Pastor Ken will be explaining the contrast between evil King Ahaz and his godly son, King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah reversed what his father had done to the temple, purifying it, and again consecrating it for worship of the Lord. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Isaiah, chapter 36, as he begins his message, King Hezekiah.
When King Hezekiah becomes king, the first thing he has to deal with is the condition that Ahaz left the kingdom in. Now, he had brought about a lack of restraint in the nation. The Bible actually says that. Unfaithfulness of some sort had always been showing up in the kings since Saul. But Ahaz hit a new low. And the words being used are the same words that are used in the Hebrew when you start talking about the golden calf. Well, that's not a good word to be using, talking about a king, when you start using that same word. Here, it's used and translated, he made Judah act without restraint. So we have a government that enforced loose morals, child sacrifice, enforced toleration of other gods, and in comes a new king. His dad, Ahaz, was only 36 when he died, only 36. And the Ahaz administration was widely known in Judah for its encouragement of a debauched lifestyle. Sound any familiar to things that we see around us today? King Ahaz had closed the temple and banned the worship of Yahweh, and the priests did nothing. Boy, does that sound familiar. At one point in his reign, King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet with his Assyrian overlord. And it was there he decided, I'm going to build an altar to the same God they worship up in Damascus. So he sent the plans back to Jerusalem, and the high priest was so compromised, he built it. 2 Kings chapter 16, Uriah the priest built the altar in accordance with all King Ahaz had sent from Damascus. So Uriah the priest made it before King Ahaz arrived from Damascus. And when the king came from Damascus, the king viewed the altar. Then the king drew near to the altar, went up on it, and burned his burnt offerings. He's not supposed to do that, but he's offering to, in the temple grounds, he's offering to a false god. And his grain offering and poured his drink offering and threw the blood of his peace offering on the altar. Ahaz effectively ended Yahweh worship in the temple and replaced Yahweh with his own God, and all the priests were okay with that. None of them stopped him. So at the age of 36, 37, right in there, he dies. And his son, who's barely 25, takes over. Now, he had been with his dad since his dad was king, of course, even before then. But his dad became king when he was 8. And he grew up in the middle of all this. And when you start doing some of the ages and all this, you kind of go like, boy, they were young. Yeah, they are. The expectation in Judah was, now that King Ahaz is dead, the good times are going to continue to roll because Hezekiah is the son of a reprobate. So he's going to be a reprobate too, right? His dad said it was okay to do all this stuff, so he's going to say the same thing. Yeah, maybe not. The first sign that there's change in the wind was probably with the decision as to where we're going to bury King Ahaz. Normally they buried him with all the Davidic kings. Hezekiah said, no, we're not. Bury him someplace else. Oh, that's a change. So what is it that the new king had experienced while growing up, and what shaped his decision making? Now, remember, his dad became king when he was around 8. But earlier than that, when he was around 7 or so, he saw the northern kingdom ally with Syria and then attack and try to take over Judah. And he saw all this. He saw those two nations defeated by Assyria and then taken into exile. And he also saw his dad reject God over and everything that being a Jew stood for. He saw his dad do that. Now, the fact that Hezekiah was not sacrificed to Molech where his brothers and sisters were is probably because of his age. His dad was 20 when he took the throne. So when Hezekiah was born, Ahaz was a young man of maybe 12 or 13. This is not unusual for them to get hitched just as soon as they can. So when Hezekiah was born, it just wasn't politically correct to sacrifice your infant son or daughter. And he was too old when dad took over the throne. But he did witness some of his younger brothers and sisters become victims of human sacrifice. That would have an impact. He heard their screams and heard and felt the anguish of their mothers, because kings had more than one wife, so Ahaz probably had several. He also personally witnessed the economic devastation caused by all of this and the military devastation that took place as well. He experienced the siege of Jerusalem by the Syrian and northern kingdom that went with the destruction of the Judean army that killed over 120,000 soldiers. So he was probably involved with the burials of all those people. His brother, his older brother, was actually killed in combat. He also witnessed 200,000 of his friends and neighbors from the surrounding cities that were taken captive by the northern kingdom and then returned just a few weeks later because the Lord got involved in the situation. And then all of those widows and orphans had to be reintegrated into society. So this is a guy who knew what war would do. He knew it. In 2 Chronicles 28, 6-8, here's where we see the story. In one day, King Pekah, son of Remaliah of Israel, killed 120,000 warriors in Judah because they had abandoned the Lord God of their ancestors. They were following Ahaz. They also, Zikri, an Ephraimite warrior, killed the king's son, Messiah. So there's the oldest son. He's gone. Now Hezekiah is next in line. Azrikam, the supervisor of the palace, was killed, and Elkanah, the king's second in command, all killed. And then the Israelites seized from their brothers 200,000 wives, sons, and daughters, and carried off a huge amount of plunder and took it back to Samaria. So King Hezekiah knew the horrors of siege warfare. He knew what it meant, and that'll show you why he does some of the things he does with the Assyrians. He knew the impact war could have on society, especially if you're on the losing side. He knew that. So as a young man, he sees his father cut a military deal with Assyria, fully embracing the world and bringing in all these other gods. Now, we don't know if he traveled to Damascus with his dad to meet the Assyrian ruler. The scriptures are silent on that. But that was not an unusual thing if that had happened. At the same time, he was also listening to Isaiah. He's hearing Isaiah give all these prophecies. And then there's his mother. Most of the time, mothers aren't mentioned. His mother was mentioned, Abijah. She was no slouch in raising this kid. He did not grow up to be like his daddy. She made sure of that. He will wind up being a living demonstration of the truths that we read about in chapter 13 to 35. Ahaz would not act on it, but Hezekiah will. In 2 Chronicles 29, we see when he becomes king, and we see something that he does when he becomes king that tells you it's going to be a different world under King Hezekiah. He was 25. He reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abijah. There we go. The daughter of Zechariah. He did right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father David had done. Now, here he is. He's king. In the first year of his reign, in the first month, he opened the doors of the house of the Lord and repaired them. He brought in the priests and the Levites and gathered them into the square on the east. It's a brand new king. He expresses his authority by systematically undoing everything his dad had done. And he starts off by reopening the temple. He throws out everything that his dad had put into it, and he cleanses it. And then he calls the priests and the Levites to account for their lack of diligence during this time. I mean, it just says, and he gathered them to the east court, and I'm sitting there going like, yeah, I wouldn't want to have been in that meeting. Because I'm sure he lectured them as to why didn't you stand up to Dad? Why didn't you do, why? None of them were prepared to even minister. They were all unclean, ceremonially unclean at that point. So within 16 days of becoming king, the temple had been cleansed, all the utensils recreated, and they were ready to start worshiping again. Problem was, none of the priests were. None of them. He was determined to undo all the previous administration had done and do it as quickly as possible. So before the end of his first month as king, the temple's open, temple worship's restarted, the temple's been reconsecrated. The northern kingdom's gone. It's in exile, but didn't stop him, not at all, because he sends letters trying to invite them to come to Passover, which he wants to celebrate. Can't do it the first month, which is the month it's supposed to take place, because none of the priests are ceremonially clean to do this. So he invites everyone to come and celebrate with him. And he sends this note to all Israel and Judah, and he also writes to Ephraim and Manasseh, making sure that they're all invited to come to the house of the Lord at Jerusalem to keep the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel. It says the king and his princes and all the assembly in Jerusalem had taken counsel to keep the Passover in the second month, not the first like they're supposed to, but in the second. They couldn't keep it at that time because, as it says in 2 Chronicles 30, the priests had not consecrated themselves in sufficient number, nor had the people assembled in Jerusalem. In other words, nobody took this seriously. They weren't really taking the Lord seriously. And those who should have, the priests and the Levites, were the worst. And Hezekiah is basically, line up, guys, we're going to get you all straightened out here. He's a good king. He loves the Lord. He's busy about doing everything that the Lord wants him to do as it pertains to worship in the temple. He cleansed the temple. He also went through the entire land of Judah and cleansed the land. All those altars that his dad set up, he got rid of. He got rid of all the altars that were in Jerusalem. True revival broke out amongst the people, and suddenly the Levites and priests wanted to be involved too. Did you pick up on that? It started with the people, not with the priests and the Levites, but with the people. The Levites and the priests had actually become part of the problem, and very few of them were consecrated. So Hezekiah had them become reconsecrated, and then he reorganized them all. Oh yeah, he did. He actually started a revival that resulted in a popular uprising to undo the evil of his dad. In 2 Chronicles 31, verses 1 and 2, we see this. Now, when all this was finished, this is after they'd had Passover, and they actually had it go an extra week because they were enjoying it so much. All Israel who were present went out to the cities of Judah and broke the pillars in pieces, cut down the Asherim, those are female altars that they had for female gods, and pulled down the high places and the altars throughout all Judah and Benjamin, as well as in Ephraim and Manasseh. Not only did they pull them down in Judah, they went back home to Ephraim and Manasseh and pulled them down there. They went to ground, those who were left started cleansing the land. Then all the sons of Israel returned to their cities, each to his possession, and Hezekiah appointed the divisions of the priests and the Levites by their divisions. Okay, he's reorganizing the priests and the Levites, each according to his service, both the priests and the Levites, for burnt offerings and for peace offerings, to minister, to give thanks, and to praise in the gates of the camp of the Lord. Now, while all this is going on, geopolitically, Assyria's got other stuff going on. Now, remember, Ahaz had ignored Yahweh and allied themselves with the Assyrian Empire at a huge cost. So what does King Hezekiah do? He rebels against Assyria. Now, doing so was politically the right thing to do from a timing perspective when he did it. The northern kingdom, which had been conquered, was busy sucking up all of Assyria's military resources in order to relocate them all back into Assyria. There was also an issue with Babylon, as well as another little nation that was north of Assyria that kind of kept them busy. Now, Hezekiah made the decision to rebel, but he prepared beforehand. He made sure. He gradually strengthened his position. He started off by taking over the cities in the Philistine plain. So he went out and took over Gath and Gaza Strip and all of that. He fortified Jerusalem. He repaired broken sections of the wall. He did some engineering projects and redirected the water from the Gihon spring into the city. And he also bought new weapons for the army and shields and started rebuilding the army with new commanders. There's also archaeological evidence that says he enclosed the western hill of the city with a new wall, and then he's the one that built the first Temple Mount around Solomon's temple. Before it was just standing there, he built a wall around the temple. He's the one that did that. So he builds a massive wall to fortify the western suburbs of the city. Now they're inside the wall. And he diverted the Gihon spring through a 1,700-foot-long tunnel, Hezekiah's tunnel. What leads to a pool called the Pool of Siloam that's within the city. That's what he did. So as you take a look at it and you see, okay, he diverted the spring from outside of the wall to in the wall, and he builds this wall where one did not exist before. He builds this. So now the city of David is walled, and there's a wall around the western suburbs, and there's a wall around the Temple Mount. So it's kind of reinforced. And then the water project, man, this guy knew what he was doing. Here's where the two set teams of diggers met. And you can tell by the pick marks that this group is coming this way, because the pick marks go that way, and this group is going that way, and that's where they met. No radar, how did they do it? They did it in a minimum length of time. They did all of that. So these are all the different places that he actually is preparing for invasion. I mean, he's going everywhere. He's doing due diligence. He's really being wise as a commander, and kings were commanders too. And what we see in 2 Kings chapter 18 is the Lord's with him. Hezekiah is successful in everything he did. He revolted against the king of Assyria and refused to pay him tribute. He conquered the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory, from their smallest outport to the largest walled city. And during the 4th year of his reign, the king of Assyria attacks the northern kingdom and takes them into captivity. Actually, it's a 3-year siege. King Hezekiah, though, knew that at some point, Assyria's issue with Babylon, Assyria's issue with the northern kingdom, Assyria's issue with Euratea, which is up in the north, will be over with. And they're going to pay attention to Judah. So he's trying to get ready, and he seeks help from Egypt. Not supposed to do that, but he seeks help from Egypt. Now, we do know he had some time. Shalmaneser or Sargon, depending upon, Sargon is Shalmaneser's son, they made their final move against the northern kingdom in the 4th year. It took them 3 years. Assyria completed the siege of Samaria in the 6th year of his reign, and then they began the final removal that had already begun under King Ahaz. In 714, the kingdom that's north of Assyria attacked their supply lines and forced Sargon into a major northern attack and campaign against the Eritrean army, which is today Turkey. That's where they were involved. And they had these constant problems from the Babylonians, so they went to Babylon and solved that problem too. And all of a sudden, everybody out west is saying, hey, let's break away. It was a good time to rebel at that point. So we see here in 2 Kings 18, verse 11, the king of Assyria deported the people of Israel to Assyria, and he settled them in that northern part that they were busy fighting wars in. He settled them in Halah and the river Gozan in the city of the Medes, up north. That's where he settled them. This happened because they didn't obey the Lord their God and broke his agreement with them. They didn't pay attention to and obey all that Moses, the Lord's servant, has commanded. Everything we talked about earlier, they didn't do. Not at all. To move all those people, and there's hundreds of thousands they have to move, and then integrate them into Assyrian culture, plus transfer people back into Samaria, that keeps the army busy for a while, because you have to have troops, you have to have capability of moving them back and forth, and you do all of this. So King Hezekiah knew that. He knew that the army was going to be busy for a few years. And it's during this time he reinforced his walls, solved the problem with the Philistines, and completed all of his engineering projects. But at some point in time, the Assyrians were going to stop picking on Samaria here, and Sargon was going to come down and eventually wind up in Jerusalem. And he knew that was going to happen. He just knew it. Isaiah, by the way, while all this is going on, is warning Judah, don't cut a deal with Egypt. Trust in the Lord. His latest set of warnings included the revelation to the nation. They didn't know that Hezekiah's regime was trying to cut a deal with Egypt for protection. Isaiah made it clear, most of Judah will be overrun by Assyria, and most normal commercial operations and agricultural operations will end. He made that crystal clear. So eventually, Sennacherib, who takes over the throne when his dad Sargon dies, has to do something with the problem out west. There's growing unrest. He still had this problem with barbarians coming from the north and coming in, so he had to resolve the issue with Babylon. But it's those western city-states and that western country of Judah, there's a problem. He needed to solve it. Now, for King Hezekiah, he conspired with the king of Ashkelon to rebel. Now, he wasn't supposed to do that either. There was only one person that remained loyal to Assyria, and they threw him into prison in Judah. Of course, Sennacherib showed up and said, give him to me, which did happen. But this is all that led to the fact that Sennacherib is going to make the decision, we're going to attack Judah. That all leads to it. So in 2 Chronicles, it's very simple the way they deal with it. After all these faithful deeds were accomplished, King Sennacherib of Assyria invaded Judah. So he's seriously faithful to the Lord as it pertains to worship. But as it pertains to geopolitics and government, not so much. He's doing other things. He's trying to use his own wisdom. Sennacherib, back to him, it said he besieged the fortified cities, intending to seize them. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had invaded and intended to attack Jerusalem, he consulted with his advisors and military officers about stopping up the springs outside the city, and they supported him. A large number of people gathered together and stopped up all the springs in the stream that flowed through the district, and they reasoned, why should the king of Assyria come and find plenty of water? Hezekiah energetically rebuilt every broken wall. He erected towers in an outer wall, as we saw, and fortified the terrace of the city of David. He made many weapons and shields. He appointed military officers over the army and assembled them in the square of the city gate. And he encouraged them, saying, be strong and brave. Don't be afraid and don't panic because of the king of Assyria and this huge army that's with him. 210,000 people, small army. We have with us one who's stronger than those who are with him. He has with him mere human strength, but the Lord our God is with us to help us and fight our battles. Did we read anywhere in there that he sought God's instruction and help in reinforcing the city? He just did it. He didn't talk to the Lord about it. He didn't seek the Lord, didn't go talk to the high priest, didn't talk to Isaiah. He's still dealing with this issue of God's here, but I can handle this. It says the army was encouraged by the words of King Hezekiah. So here's how Sennacherib did things. This is his modus operandi. And we get this from reading, Sennacherib didn't have a good press officer, so he wrote his own press releases.
The voice you just heard is that of Pastor Ken here on the UnSafe Bible, as he's making his way through an Old Testament book of Isaiah. This is one of many teachings in this book, and we trust that the words of Isaiah will encourage you in your own walk of faith. Are you new to hearing the Word of God? Are you still trying to figure out this whole Jesus thing? You know what? That's okay. We all begin somewhere. Are you listening closely? Begin now. We're here for you and would like nothing better than to connect with you. Pretty pleased with a cherry on top to go to our website? All right, it's the unsafebible.com. And click on the Connect tab. Then click on the Connect card. There you'll find a form to fill out. This allows us to get in touch with you. We honestly look forward to speaking with you. If this feels a little overwhelming, we understand. Why not come see firsthand what we're all about? We'd love to have you at one of our services. All information can be found at the unsafebible.com. While you're there, be sure to look around. You can learn more about us and what we believe. Or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. There's also an archive of messages easily organized so that you can find whatever interests you rather quickly. Don't be shy. Stay a while and soak in God's Word. When you're done listening, would you prayerfully consider donating to this ministry? If so, just locate the Give tab to get started. Thank you so much for your support. Our time is about up for today, but we hope you make plans to join us again here on the UnSafe Bible.